Chapter 1. In the living room, our parents sat on the sofa, gazing at my sister and me with a look of serious expectation. "Emily, Grace," my father began, his voice steady. "It's not that your mother and I don't care about your feelings, but our family's current project needs substantial funding. The Smith family's marriage proposal arrives at a crucial time for us." He paused, measuring his words. "Besides, the Smith Corporation is one of the top enterprises in York City. Their family is disciplined, and Adam Smith is a talented, upstanding man, a good match." After he spoke, both of them turned their gaze toward me, waiting for me to agree willingly. In my previous life, just as they had hoped, I accepted their request and married into the Smith family. But this time, before I could respond, my sister rose to her feet, facing our parents confidently. "Dad, Mom, I'm the eldest daughter. It should be my responsibility to marry." My father's eyes narrowed slightly. "Emily, have you truly considered this? Marriage is not a matter to be taken lightly." Her voice was steady as she replied, "I have. I want to marry Adam Smith. Besides, you've cared for me all these years. Now that the company is struggling, it's my duty to repay the family." She looked at me and squeezed my hand, giving me a bright, almost triumphant smile. "Grace, don't you want to see me find a place where I truly belong?" Beneath her smile, a glint of warning flickered in her eyes. I nodded. "Of course I want you to be happy. The Smith family is wealthy and powerful. They won't mistreat you." My father studied her resolute expression, pondered a moment, and eventually gave his consent. I understood her true intentions, though. She wasn't willing to sacrifice herself. She wanted the path I had once walked. Chapter 2. In my previous life, after I accepted the arranged marriage, my sister gradually took control of the family business. However, she lacked both the skill and the determination to manage it responsibly. Under her watch, the company faltered, cash flow stalled, and it was eventually pushed to the brink of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, after I married Alex Smith, I lived a life of luxury and became a senior executive at Smith Corporation. Desperate, my sister traveled to York City, hoping that the Smith family might step in and bail out the family business. But when she arrived, what she saw instead was Alex helping me out of his car with a protective smile. Sitting in her own car, jealousy consumed her. In a moment of rage, she hit the gas and drove straight into us. "Why should you have the good life while I'm left with the ruins?" she screamed. "If you hadn't pushed me aside, I would have been the one marrying Adam Smith. Both of us ended up lying in a pool of blood." So this time, after being reborn, she seized the chance to marry into the Smith family before I could. Given a second chance, she still chose marriage and a man over everything else. Fine. That gives me the freedom to carve out a new life. I opened my phone, searched for an old contact, and typed a message. "John, does your offer still stand?" That weekend, our parents arranged a dinner with the Smith family. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, a well-dressed couple in their 40s, were accompanied by a young man in his 20s with glasses and a gentle smile. Alex Smith. That face, etched into my mind, haunting my darkest memories. The moment I saw him, a shiver ran through me. That same smile had been on his face when he forced a plastic tube down my throat to make me vomit. All because I'd gained half a pound at dinner. He dragged me to the bathroom, his grip like iron, until I emptied everything I had eaten. The burning sensation in my throat crept back just at the memory. I shook my head, forcing myself to stay grounded, pressing my hand against my chest to remind myself, I am safe now. Chapter 3. From the moment Alex Smith entered, my sister's gaze locked onto him. Mrs. Smith examined her with shrewd eyes before nodding approvingly. "This must be Emily." Right on cue, my sister lowered her head demurely. "Hello, Mrs. Smith." "Not bad," Mrs. Smith said with a glint of approval. "She seems like a suitable match for our Alex." Taking a warm, pre-prepared towel from the table, Mrs. Smith dabbed her hands. "Our family doesn't have many rules, but the ones we have must be followed. Once you join our household, I'll teach you everything step by step." Hearing this, my sister beamed. Though Mrs. Smith's words were slightly rigid, the message was clear. Her marriage to Alex was as good as settled. I quietly focused on my meal, staying silent. In my previous life, after marrying into the Smith family, Mrs. Smith looked down on me, saying I came from a small family with no proper upbringing. She imposed a strict regimen, dictating every aspect of my life. I had to report my whereabouts every time I left the house. Even my weight was monitored with each ounce scrutinized. The smallest infraction resulted in punishment, usually skipping meals under the guise of image management. Alex only amplified his mother's controlling habits. Instead of objecting, he intensified them, going as far as forcing me to delete all my contacts, isolating me from the outside world. Resistance meant time locked in the storage room, dark, stifling, and silent. Mr. Smith remained indifferent, a man solely driven by profit. He turned a deaf ear to every plea, every call for help. In time, I learned to bury my emotions to mask obedience. Eventually, I managed to convince Alex to let me work at Smith Corporation, where I brought in deal after deal, becoming indispensable. Watching my sister now, I felt a touch of bitter amusement. She was too busy basking in her good fortune to notice the hidden threats behind Mrs. Smith's words. Chapter 4. With just one meal, the two families finalized the marriage arrangement. As we left the restaurant, I checked my phone and made my way to a nearby cafe as agreed. I spotted him at once, a man sitting by the window with an easy smile. "John, sorry to keep you waiting." John, my senior in university, had majored in Chinese medicine. We met in a calligraphy club, became friends along with a few others, and eventually grew close. After graduation, he started his own business and once invited me to join. But I was absorbed in my thesis at the time and hadn't given it much thought. In my previous life, that opportunity slipped away once I married Alex. He demanded I delete all contacts, cutting off ties with everyone. But now, with my sister taking my place in the Smith family, I finally had the freedom to accept John's invitation. "Not at all," he replied unfazed. "My office is just nearby. I can show you around." "I'd love that," I said, smiling. Following him, we walked into a building beside the cafe. We were soon approached by a petite girl who lit up upon seeing me. "Grace, it's been ages," she exclaimed, wrapping me in a warm hug. I immediately recognized her voice. A junior from university and a friend from our club. Other familiar faces soon gathered around, greeting me warmly. Some I knew well. Others were new additions. As John showed me around, he introduced me to his team. The company was small, mainly staffed by old friends from our calligraphy club, focusing on health-oriented skincare products. The research and development team was composed of graduates from the Chinese medicine department. Since I had studied economics, John hoped I could help manage the company's operations. After the tour, he extended his hand, his expression both serious and welcoming. "Grace, welcome to the team." Chapter 5. After completing the onboarding process, John drove me back home. Life quickly became hectic. I rented an apartment near the office and immersed myself fully in my work. In my past life, after marrying into the Smith family, I had persuaded Alex to let me work at his company. With relentless effort, I gradually worked my way up to a senior executive position. In this life, the invaluable experience I gained helped me adjust to my current role swiftly. My parents didn't show much concern about me finding a new job. They had already given away a third of their shares as my sister's dowry and subtly discouraged me from joining the company's management. My sister's wedding was an extravagant affair. Afterward, she stayed in York City with the Smith family. She only returned home on holidays, and even then it was mostly for brief family dinners. On one of these occasions, my mom prepared a grand feast, featuring all of my sister's favorite dishes. My sister sat next to Alex, her appearance noticeably thinner. My mom came out of the kitchen with more dishes. "Emily, it's rare for you to come home. I made your favorite sweet and sour ribs. Eat more, okay? Look at how thin you've become." My dad immediately frowned, placing a rib in her bowl. "Your mom went to the market early this morning to get these ribs, they're fresh." My sister glanced at the table full of food, her expression strained. "Thanks, Dad, but I'm dieting." She ate slowly, her appetite clearly lacking. I recognized that behavior. It was a sign of anorexia. After countless forced purgings in my past life, I had suffered from the same condition. "Dieting? You're already so thin. Why bother with dieting?" My dad frowned, clearly displeased. "Body management is crucial. You can't slack off for even a day," my sister said, setting her chopsticks down. She shifted the focus to me. "But Nina, if you don't manage your weight properly, You won't attract any men. Chapter 6. This day and age I have hands and feet, I can take care of myself, I replied coolly, taking another bite of food. Mom's meal is delicious and I'm eating plenty. Are you sure you're not going to eat anything, sister? Yes, Emily, even if you're dieting, just have a little bit, my mom added, her voice soft with concern. But she had no idea that any attempt to coax my sister into eating only deepened her anxiety. Mom's ribs are so tasty. Didn't you used to love them? One piece won't hurt you, I insisted, placing a rib in my sister's bowl. But, she hesitated, clearly struggling. I cut her off gently but firmly. Sister, it's not often that you come home. Don't disappoint Mom and Dad after they've worked so hard to prepare this meal. My parents looked at her expectantly, silently pleading for her to enjoy the meal. My sister paused, glancing at the dish in her bowl, then at Alex. Seeing that he wasn't going to step in, she reluctantly picked up the rib and took a small bite. She barely chewed before her face paled. Setting her chopsticks down, she hurried to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. We could hear her retching from the other side of the door. My parents exchanged worried glances. My mom stood up, knocking gently on the door. Emily, are you okay? I'm fine. My sister's voice cracked as she spoke, betraying the discomfort she was trying so desperately to hide. Mom, go back to the table. I'll take care of it, Alex said, holding a glass of water in one hand and gently nudging her back toward the table. Emily must have eaten something too rich for her stomach. She'll feel better soon. Alex's concern appeared genuine. Sighing in resignation, my mom returned to her seat at the table. That evening, none of us could finish our meal. The next morning, Alex informed us that my sister was still unwell, and he left early to take her back to their home. Chapter 7. Days passed and I grew more confident in my new role. When the company faced a shortage of funding for research and development, I used my personal savings and proposed that I personally invest in the company. With fresh capital and my management of the business, John and his team were able to focus entirely on the research. The pace of development sped up, and the business began to thrive. Our brand was gaining recognition and we were seeing steady growth. Recently, the company had been invited to a prestigious business gala in New York City. I traveled there as the official company representative. I had planned to stop by the mall for a quick shopping spree, but fate had other plans. In a twist of irony, I ran into someone I knew all too well. My sister, looking even more fragile and gaunt than before, walked silently behind Mrs. Smith, her head lowered. She didn't even look up as I passed. I hadn't seen any posts from her on social media for quite a while. I suspected her phone was being monitored by Alex or Mrs. Smith, and any communication had to go through them. You're Alex's wife, aren't you? Our daughter-in-law. Look at you now. How could you show up at public events like this? Mrs. Smith's voice was sharp as she picked out clothes, her tone dripping with criticism. If it weren't for our family accepting you, you wouldn't have this kind of life. My sister didn't respond. She simply nodded, her body language clearly signaling her discomfort. She was too weak to do anything but comply. Mrs. Smith held up a dress, sizing it against my sister's frail figure. The moment the fabric touched her skin, my sister's face tightened with distress. Mrs. Smith didn't notice or didn't care that my sister was visibly uncomfortable. She'd insisted that my sister maintain her figure, and the pressure to do so had driven her to extreme measures. Anorexia had been her coping mechanism. The rapid weight loss had only fueled the frustration of the Smith family. The sudden influx of food only worsened her condition. Yet, whenever she dared to refuse, she was locked away in a dark, lonely room as punishment. She had no idea how long she had been in the storage room. The silent, lightless, confined space amplified every discomfort in her body, and the loneliness nearly suffocated her. Just thinking about that period made her face turn pale with fear. Chapter 8. Mrs. Smith took a phone call, likely something urgent. After giving my sister a few brief instructions, she hurried off. My sister let out a sigh of relief, then turned around and saw me shopping in the store. In an instant, her previously ingratiating smile towards Mrs. Smith disappeared, replaced by an air of arrogance as she looked down at me. "What are you doing here? Why shouldn't I be here?" I replied nonchalantly while perusing the clothes. "Aren't you working at some startup?" How much can they even pay you? Her voice was a little hoarse, probably from the long-term strain caused by frequent vomiting. Don't say I didn't warn you, but this store is way out of your league if you're just living on a salary. I'm on a salary, true, but what about you? You don't even have a job, I shot back, pausing to cast a pointed look at her. I'm Mrs. Smith now, why would I need a job? I have a husband who's happy to spend money on me, she said, waving the supplementary card Alex had given her. She gestured toward the clothes Mrs. Smith had chosen and addressed the sales assistant. I'll take these. Please wrap them up. Of course, please wait a moment, the assistant replied, taking the card and processing the total. With efficiency, the assistant wrapped the clothes and handed them, along with the receipt and card, back to my sister. No more than a minute later, her phone rang. Seeing the caller ID, my sister's expression grew even more smug. She deliberately cleared her throat, answering the phone in a sugary sweet voice. Hey darling, what's up? Alex's voice came through the line. Did you buy something? Yeah, Mom took me shopping for clothes, but she had to leave early. Since it's rare for me to get out, I decided to pick up a couple of pieces before heading back. I see. I won't be home for dinner tonight, so just head home early, Alex said. The call ended shortly after. Chapter 9. A brief flicker of disappointment passed across my sister's face. But once she realized I was still there, she quickly regained her haughty composure. Why are you staring at me like that? Jealous that I have such a good husband? Just so you know, he's your brother-in-law, so you'd better watch yourself. Unable to resist, I let out a small laugh. A good husband who needs to be consulted before his wife buys a couple of dresses with his card? You're just jealous, she sneered, looking at me with disdain. You probably can't even afford a single item here with your monthly salary. Is that so? I responded coolly, handing the clothes I had chosen to the sales assistant and pulling a card from my bag. Please ring these up. My sister crossed her arms, smugly awaiting my reaction when I saw the total price. The assistant took the clothes from me, and as soon as she saw the card, her attitude shifted to one of even more warmth. Ms. Zhou, I'll process this right away. Please give us a moment. She signaled to another assistant, who quickly approached. Ms. Zhou, we've prepared some refreshments for you. You can wait in our VIP lounge. The store, a luxury brand with a minimalist and elegant design, was one I frequented. The card I handed over was the store's VIP card. No need for that, I said with a smile, waving off the offer. I turned to my sister, adding, even if I spent my entire salary, at least it's my own money. Unlike you, who needs permission to buy a single item. Where did you get all this money? The VIP threshold for this store is quite high, my sister said, her face shifting from surprise to contempt. You must be up to something shady. Sister, I said, my smile fading into something more serious. Spreading baseless rumors without evidence could have legal consequences. By this point, the assistant had returned with my packaged items. I thanked her softly and walked out of the store. My sister was left speechless, standing there watching my retreating figure. Chapter 10. The business gala in York City was held at the most luxurious hotel, inviting prominent and influential companies in the industry. Although our company couldn't yet compare to the giants of the field, it was rapidly growing and considered a rising star with great potential. Seeing me at the event, many familiar guests came over to chat with me. After greeting former clients and handling various conversations with other guests, I finally had a moment to catch my breath. Just as I was about to find a corner to rest, a slightly hoarse voice spoke in my ear. When did this event become so low class? How did someone like you manage to get in? I looked up and unsurprisingly, it was my sister. I noticed Alex Smith talking with others not far away, indicating that my sister had accompanied him to the event. What do you mean by someone like me? I retorted. You weren't invited but can attend because you're with Alex. I was invited, so why shouldn't I be here? My sister snorted. Who knows how you managed to get an invitation? She glanced around the room, her eyes lingering on several guests' female companions, and insinuated, maybe you're just like them. No matter how much older the men are, as long as you make them happy, you get whatever you want. I sighed, placing my glass aside, not wanting to argue further, and got up to leave. What, feeling guilty? My sister immediately blocked my path. Or maybe you've found your next target and are off to catch a rich husband? Sister, I told you, spreading false accusations can have consequences, I said, my expression darkening as I prepared to push her hand away. But someone moved faster than I did. A firm hand gently but decisively removed my sister's arm from my path. I looked up to see John standing beside me, his expression composed but stern. Is there a problem here? John asked, looking between my sister and me. My sister's face flushed with anger and embarrassment, but she didn't respond. She glanced over at Alex, who was still engaged in conversation, oblivious to the scene unfolding. No problem, I said, meeting John's eyes with a grateful smile. I was just leaving. John nodded and turned to my sister. It's best not to make baseless accusations. It reflects poorly on you and your family. My sister's expression hardened, but she remained silent as I walked away with John by my side. Chapter 11. My sister, seeing who had come over, immediately clung to his arm and leaned affectionately against him. Alex, are you done with your conversation? Yes, Alex responded flatly. However, when he looked at me, his demeanor changed. This must be Emily's sister, Grace, right? Ever since your sister returned to York City, we haven't seen each other. I didn't expect to run into you here. I quickly waved my hand and stepped back instinctively. Mr. Smith, there's no need for pleasantries. This is a professional setting, and I prefer not to discuss personal matters here. All right then, if you don't want to talk personal matters, let's discuss business. He smiled and gestured for me to sit on the nearby sofa, completely ignoring my sister who was still by his side. Our company is interested in entering the wellness industry, and we've been looking to collaborate with your company for some time. Alex began to explain, but my sister tugged at his sleeve. Alex, why are you telling her all this? Isn't she just here looking for a sponsor? That's nonsense. Alex rebuked sharply. Grace is here as a specially invited guest of the business association. Do you think everyone is as shallow as you? My sister was startled by his sudden outburst. Her eyes reddened and tears began to fall. But what about her? Alex shook off her arm and sneered. Look at your sister, successful and beautiful. And look at you, thin and lacking in both grace and knowledge. How do you think you measure up as Mrs. Smith? Seeing my sister on the verge of tears again, I took the opportunity to leave. Grace, don't go yet. It's rare for you to be here. Let me treat you to a meal, Alex called after me as I walked away, leaving my sister behind to chase after me. If you have something urgent, my car is in the parking lot. I can give you a ride. I quickened my pace and finally managed to lose Alex. Leaning back in the driver's seat, I let out a long sigh of relief. Chapter 12. My sister was left alone at the gala, staring blankly at Alex's retreating back as he followed me. She wanted to chase after him but found her legs too weak to move. Grace Jo, why is it that even with a second chance, Alex still prefers you? She muttered through gritted teeth. I'm the legitimate Mrs. Smith, Alex's wife. She questioned herself. Was she not pretty enough? Was she not pleasing enough to him? Countless possibilities swirled in her mind until she reached a conclusion. Yes, I need to give Alex a child. Once I have a child, Alex won't stray. She wiped away her tears and clenched her fists tightly. After discussing with Mrs. Smith, a plan was set in motion. Mrs. Smith arranged for professional doctors and nutritionists to help my sister recuperate. The Smith family still desired an heir. Due to long-term dieting and weight loss, my sister's health was significantly compromised, requiring substantial effort to restore. Following medical treatment, her anorexia improved considerably, but the hardships she endured were no less severe. In addition to daily medication, she had to undergo regular acupuncture and drug injections. 3 months of suffering later, she finally became pregnant. She believed that Alex would now stay by her side, ready to embrace fatherhood. However, Alex promptly booked a flight under the pretense of a business trip, opting to stay temporarily in Jean City. Initially, he visited my company under the guise of discussing collaboration, but when I reviewed his proposal, it was clear it had been hastily put together, with a flimsy framework and almost no feasibility. I decisively rejected the business collaboration, only for Alex to switch tactics and openly pursue me, sending flowers and gifts daily through the reception. Of course, these items ended up in the company trash bin. Unable to tolerate his persistence, I ordered security to memorize his face and ensure he never set foot in the building again. After several failed attempts to gain entry, Alex had no choice but to return to York City. Chapter 13. My sister couldn't keep the baby. Given her health, getting pregnant was already a significant achievement. When she heard that Alex had left her behind and was in Jean City, showing frequent affection towards me, she became so agitated that she started showing signs of a threatened miscarriage before the first trimester was even over. The Smith family took her phone away before the surgery, preventing her from contacting our parents. With Jean City and York City being far apart, our parents had no idea about her miscarriage. In the hospital room, my sister lay weakly on the bed, freshly out of surgery, her face ghostly pale. Mrs. Smith glanced at her briefly, only advising her to recover quickly and try to conceive again soon. Alex had no desire to see her, using the excuse of being busy with work to avoid the hospital. They didn't hire a nurse, leaving my sister alone to recuperate in the hospital room. Struggling, my sister got out of bed and made her way to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror and felt a wave of despair. The reflection showed a gaunt figure with hollowed eyes. After her anorexia improved, she had been eating normally, gaining some weight back to a healthy level. But the nausea from the pregnancy had reverted her progress, leaving her even more emaciated than before. Lifting her shirt, she saw her abdomen marked with needle scars and bruises from the treatments. She collapsed onto the floor, staring at the mirror, unable to believe that the person she saw was herself. Now Mrs. Smith saw her only as a tool for bearing children for the family, and Alex had grown so tired of her that he wished she would simply disappear. Her parents, far away in their hometown, had no idea of the suffering she was enduring. Only Grace, her sister, was living freely and happily, just as she had in their previous life. A deep hatred filled my sister's eyes. Ignoring the pain in her lower abdomen, she struggled to stand up. Chapter 14. Ms. Zhou, there's a guest downstairs claiming to be your sister. My assistant knocked on my office door. Emily, isn't she supposed to be in York City? Why would she suddenly come to my company? Take me to see her. My assistant led me to the reception room. Inside, my sister sat on the sofa with her head down, looking utterly exhausted. When she saw me, she lifted her head and gave me a weak smile. You're here. Something felt off. This wasn't like my sister's usual behavior. Normally, she was haughty and overbearing towards me. Why was she smiling now? I noticed that since I entered the room, she had kept one hand hidden behind her back. Ignoring her, I stepped back to the door and signaled the guards outside. Two burly guards nodded and swiftly moved in, pinning my sister down on either side. She tried to evade but couldn't match their strength and was quickly restrained. With a clatter, a knife fell from her hand to the floor. I sighed inwardly. After the incident in our past life and Alex's recent relentless pursuit, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. I had hired 2 bodyguards as soon as Alex had started his antics in Jean City. Pinned down and unable to move, my sister shouted at me. Grace Zhou, did you know all along about the true nature of the Smith family? No wonder you let me marry into that family right before your eyes. She struggled against the guard's grip, but they held her firmly. It's all your fault. You're the reason I'm like this now. As she continued to curse, I had already dialed the police. Our company was only 5 minutes from the nearest police station, and the officers arrived quickly to take my sister away. Chapter 15. My sister was eventually sentenced to 2 years in prison for attempted assault with a deadly weapon. My parents tried to persuade me to withdraw the charges, but I firmly refused and cut off all contact with them. After the trial, I stopped keeping tabs on my sister. With the company about to go public, my workload doubled. The Smith family promptly filed for divorce from my sister and severed all business ties with my family. My parents, having changed their phone numbers, called me several times. But as I was constantly traveling and had no permanent residence, they couldn't find me and resorted to calling. With my sister in prison, even for a short sentence, she was left with a criminal record. Returning to work at our family company with such a blemish on her record would make it hard for her to gain respect. Moreover, with the Smith family pulling their investment, the already struggling business floundered further. The company, stuck in its outdated ways, couldn't keep up with modern developments and was now on the brink of bankruptcy. Thus, my parents pinned their hopes on me, hoping I would take over the company and support them in their old age. I decisively refused and changed my phone number. I would transfer the stipulated retirement funds to their account regularly, but as for anything beyond that, growing up, my parents provided just enough for my survival. I neither wanted to, nor had the energy to, repay them with both material and emotional support. The Smith family's withdrawal wasn't solely due to my sister's actions. Unable to keep up with the times, the Smith Corporation itself was gradually declining. They couldn't afford to support a failing company, so their withdrawal was understandable. At the company's celebration for going public, I clinked glasses with the other founders, downing the contents in one go. Tomorrow, I would be flying abroad to expand our international business. There was still much to do. A better life awaited me in the future.